right? And then fast forward to when we were at The Rock. And you and I made a very interesting discovery at The Rock. We discovered that there were small parties at The Rock that didn't even get 1,000 votes, that were extraordinarily excited about the result. And we were like, what is going on here? And somebody was like, no, Ubaba's winning. And we started realizing there were small parties that were definitely invested in MK more than in themselves.
Oh my God, I completely forgot about that story. Do you remember?
Yes.
Like we were walking in The Rock and then someone from a small party came up to me and it was like, we
Excited.
won. And I was like, what party are you from? They're like, no, not us, MK. I was
yes. Like, yeah. And it was one of those small parties. Nobody knew their name, all of that. And then it hit me that MK had been mobilizing beyond themselves. So when everybody was thinking about, has MK infiltrated the EFF or the ANC, it had become clear to me that MK was everywhere, right? And so we then started to understand the scale of MK was much larger than it looked. And so you can't ignore that. You can't ignore MK in that kind of reality. And then a day later, there were 26 parties standing behind Jacob Zuma. When we were at The Rock and he was making those pronouncements around the IEC. So from that point onwards, I've taken MK extraordinarily seriously. Because I'm like, when you see something, I'm a political commentator. I comment on what I see, not on what I want. I see things that I go, hey, guys, have you looked at that? And think about its implications.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's been two things that we've done wrong, that majority of people in politics have done wrong and outside of politics, because again, Rivonia Circle, we were listening to voters before the election happened, right? So we did what we called voter-to-voter conversations.
Right.
And that meant we didn't allow politicians in the room. We let voters talk amongst each other as they were making voting choices. And so again, I heard people reason around MK, and I realized it wasn't about Jacob Zuma. And so one of the mistakes we've made in analyzing the prospects of MK is making it about Jacob Zuma, the person.
So true. So true.
And attaching everything about MK and who's joining and who's not, and measuring it against Jacob Zuma. And I'm going to make this comparison a few times, but I'm making it for illustrative purposes. I do not want to get into a debate about me conflating these two people as one, right? But I think there is a parallel to be drawn here. It's in the same way that in the US, people are making MAGA, the movement, about Donald Trump, the person. And you're conflating things.
Yeah.
You're conflating what people are buying into at a ideological level, at a sociological level, at a political level, into a person. And I think that there are people who support MAGA who are all about Donald Trump, and there are people who support MAGA who have nothing, no interest, despite Donald Trump. Yeah. Or don't even support MAGA, but will vote for MAGA, will buy into it because they don't support the establishment.
Absolutely.
The establishment that is the US political elites and economic elites. And Donald Trump, like a Bolsonaro, like a Le Pen, like many other people, have not come up to sell something. They've just come up on a wave that says there's something wrong with the establishment. And I am willing, courageous enough, whatever, to point it out. So some people are just on that bandwagon. And I heard a lot of that when voters spoke about MK.
Yeah.
Where voters were saying, no, we're going to vote MK just to teach the ANC a lesson. We're going to vote MK just to teach white people a lesson. There's so many things going on in terms of why people are attaching themselves to MK that has nothing to do with the person of Jacob Zuma.
Yeah.
And I think that's a political reality that may be uncomfortable. It may be wrong. They may be wrong for doing that because the power that Jacob Zuma has in that party is undeniable. You can see it in their constitution. But that's still what people's realities are. And I think that goes to the second point that we've made, is this idea that MK is just going to disappear. It's going to implode. Then if I hear another person tell me that MK is the new Cope, I'm going to just lose my mind.
I know it's copium, because it's a way that people are trying to nurse their fear of MK coming onto the scene. I fully agree with you. So there's the Zuma trope. It's all about Zuma. There's the MK is on the verge of imploding trope. There's the ethnic mobilization trope. And I think those are the three dominant tropes around MK. All of which obviously play some part in MK. But to collapse and, as you say, conflate MK to those things is to make a drastic mistake, because there's so much else going on. In fact, there was a friend of mine who was in KZN just in the build-up to the election and spending a lot of time in rural KZN. And he was saying, there's something so interesting about the idiom that MK is using. Firstly, using the Zulu language, not because it's Zulu nationalism, but to say that politics doesn't have to happen in the English language all the time. Reflecting on certain cultural and traditional values that resonate with people, whether you like them or not, and bringing that into the formal political space, and doing so in a way where people are like, we've been locked out for so long, and our identity in this space has been denied for so long. It's finally being affirmed. There's so much going on that people are failing to see, and it's like, this is one of the biggest political changes in our country.
We can't ignore it.
We're locking ourselves into these tired tropes.
Yeah, and you can't ignore it. That doesn't mean you by saying, like, there's nothing I can do to legitimize MK.
Yeah, exactly.
More than MK can legitimize MK.
Yeah, 2.5 million votes.
Really, like, I cannot legitimize MK more than what it has managed to do for itself, right? It got double the amount of votes almost that COPE got, when COPE was a disruptive force in our politics, with half the amount of time almost, right? So you can't ignore that. And I think that people would like to ignore MK. I think, and particularly people in civil society, I think people in progressive spaces would like to ignore MK because it makes the world feel safer, because MK introduces a level of uncertainty into our politics and a level of disruption into our politics that we say we want. But it hasn't come in the form that people would like, that makes people comfortable. Even me. But I've decided to confront that reality, not run from it. That's the first thing I was communicating in that thing, is that I take seriously that MK is here, and unless I get other information, it looks like it is galloping ahead.
Yeah.
It is organizing itself and galloping ahead. Now, you may say it's anti-democratic organizing in the way that it is establishing itself. Yes, you're correct. Yet it is still doing that, and it is still gaining traction. You may say it is conservative values that they're driving in their manifesto. Yes, but that somehow resonated with 2 million voters. When the election before, when Urban Jim's party presented itself as a socialist, progressive, union-based party with 300,000 members, it got 5,000 votes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you cannot tell me that I must overlook the 2 million people that voted there because those are just conservatives. Especially when those conservatives have been largely drawn from one of the most progressive forces in South African history, the ANC.
Yeah.
So they are mobilizing ANC voters and EFA voters. We all agree on that.
And the radical side of the ANC, not like the moderate base of...
I even disagree with that. I disagree with that because I don't think that it's just about radical politics either. I think it's also about a politics of opportunity. One of the things that we've been clear about is that South Africans have been looking for, South African voters have been looking for an alternative to the ANC for years now.
Absolutely.
And not just a new party. Otherwise, all the 500 parties that exist would satisfy somebody's thirst. People have been looking for an alternative to the ANC. So even if Floyd reckons that here's an opportunity to shape this thing to his own beat.
Sure.
So I think people see in MK an opportunity. Maybe it's because they think Jacob is going to, collapse and die. And they can then become the incumbent on this machinery that is built. Sure. I heard something silly today on the way here. Somebody was saying MK is the brokest party in South. Cause that just is like, there's no way, right? Because there's also a machinery there that clearly has resources. And even if we don't want to talk about resources before the election, they get 3.5 million rand per seat in parliament.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, on the basis of just the electoral system,
And that's besides the salaries people got.
Think of KZN, local, or the provincial government.
They got 3.5 million rand for every seat in parliament just to the party.
More than the EFF has ever had from the electoral system.
Absolutely.
On the first go.
So there's a lot of political opportunity people that see there. And the other thing about it, and I've said this so much to emerging parties, I've said, if you look at the parties that have grown since they started, all of them have allowed contestation publicly. Now, people might say the MK is different because the MK has already pronounced they're not going to go to conference. Yet we have watched the MK fight each other in public every week without fail. Because one of the things that makes political parties work is when there is contestation and people can contest each other, win or lose, and still stick to the thing. That's how the ANC's managed to, quote unquote, revive itself. Not renew. It's definitely not renewed, but it's revived itself with every contestation, right? And I would argue that there are parties like the UDM that are never going to grow because there's no contestation. There's no space for debate. There's no space for challenging. And granted, there's very little space for ideological debate in parties anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But this is now contestation for power and positions. So we've now reached the floor. But even at the base level where you're talking about power and positions, there's a level of contestation. And people can fight. And for me, political parties need to be like siblings. People need to operate like a family, like siblings. You know, your siblings are the people that you can fight with hard because you know they're not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, when you're a political party and you can't fight because people will just go, you can't build anything. You can't build a comradeship out of that. Now, again, this is not talking about the quality of their politics. I'm not questioning whether or not they are progressive or not, or whether I agree with their values or not. I'm looking at politically what's going on. So I say all of that, and I say that makes MK very much a prospect of a party that's going to continue to grow, whether we like it or not. Now you say, okay, what is it growing to do? And that's the thing that my tweet was answering. MK has postured, for better or worse, as a progressive party.
Yeah.
And that idea has been legitimized, particularly by the EFF, unfortunately. So once the EFF invites the MK to a progressive caucus in parliament, you are calling the MK progressive. Now you're fighting me because I said because I used the word progressive that you used when you partnered with the MK party. The MK has been saying it is progressive politics the whole time. People I've seen maybe a think piece or two saying the MK is not progressive, but that narrative is not caught on in society.
No.
That narrative is not, it's not part of the discourse. In fact, what MK has successfully done is it has turned the conversation about progressive politics into two things. One, pro-black politics. They have turned the word progressive in a short space of time to acutely focus on pro-black, pro-poor. And they claim to be both of those things, right? So they've ignored all the other parts of being progressive.
Yeah.
And they've just zeroed in on that. And the other thing is